Hey there, it's Mark Spencer from Ripple Training, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about how to use Ripple 3D Title Styles, which is a set of plugins for Final Cut Pro 10 from Ripple Training, available in the Titles browser in Final Cut Pro 10. If you're watching this video, you probably came here because you're already using them and clicked on the tutorial button. Otherwise, you might have found this video some other way, and you're a little confused, but stick around. You can find these from FX Factory or going to rippletraining.com. So there's roughly 200 different titles in here. Your actual number may vary because this is not a final product when I'm recording this. It's shortly to be a final product. When you have it, it's final. And to be able to check these out, if you just skim over any of these Ripple 3D title styles, you'll get a preview of what each one looks like. So you can tell what it looks like before you use it. They're organized into logical categories, as you've probably already discovered. One thing you may not know is if you want to search on a specific type of material, you can just type it in the search field here. So I'll type concrete because I want something concrete to go with my clip here. And I've got some interesting concrete options here, and I'm previewing it. I like this one. I could drag it, but instead I'm going to use the letter Q to make a connect edit to my clip in the timeline. You can place these directly on the primary storyline over black, but by placing them in the timeline, you may notice that when I play, the background clip automatically is blurred by default. You can change that, but it's a way of bringing attention to the title. I'm also going to select the title. That way, if I press the / key, I can loop and play just that title. I have looping enabled in Final Cut. And I'm going to assume you know your way around Final Cut here and focus on how to get the most out of these titles here. So the next thing I'll do is press Command 4 to open the title inspector, or I can click right here. And I'm going to focus on the title inspector. The text inspector is full of parameters that are the same for any time you use text in Final Cut Pro 10. If you're not familiar with how to use this text inspector, I highly recommend you get our detailed tutorial on new features in Final Cut Pro 10.2 available at rippletraining.com that will give you all the background that you need. The title inspector is specific to these templates. So let's take a look through, and I'll focus on those things that might not be completely obvious at first. There is a supersized checkbox up front because by default the text is probably too big, but it's great for previewing and selecting a good texture. But you don't need that when you're making your real title, so you can uncheck that and get more reasonably sized type. So that's generally the first thing I recommend. You can then choose a font. So I'll just choose something else. You can choose a size, just dragging on the size slider. And by the way, many of these parameters here are also available in the text inspector, but we've combine them into the title inspector so you don't need to keep switching back and forth between these tabs. You could do it in either place, it'll do the same thing, but it's just a convenience. I've set these up as a workflow that you can kind of work straight through down here and get most of done what you need to get done. Let's change the text itself. I'm going to return to make 2 lines of text because I find I often want 2 lines of text. And then you can see I've got a line spacing parameter here because I find if I use 2 lines frequently, I need to adjust the line spacing. So you need to select all the text first like this, and then I'm going to bring those 2 closer together. And now you probably know that you can manipulate any 3D text directly in the viewer by clicking on it and using the rotation bands or using the arrows to move the text. But we've also published in the title inspector position and rotation, not just to be able to move it here, but to be able to keyframe it as well, which I'll show you in a moment. For now, I'm just going to drag this title up, and I may rotate it directly in the viewer here. Change it a little bit. And because I've rotated it and moved it, it's a little too big now, so I'll make it a little bit smaller. And because I've made it smaller, I need to adjust the line spacing. But there we go. I haven't had to switch tabs and get my basics set up the way I want it. A few other parameters here I don't really need to adjust. The weight of the letters, sometimes that's useful. I find it useful. The depth is how much extrusion. Let's give them a little more extrusion. And the front edge bevel, I'd rather have a rounded front edge in this case and maybe a little bit larger rounding on there. All parameters available from the text inspector. As are the next few. Lighting style is usually the next thing I look at. Maybe we'll do behind. I don't like that too much. How about below? Okay, that looks pretty cool. I'll use that. Intensity, I frequently find with a lot of these custom textures that you might want to increase the intensity a little bit to brighten them up. This one looks pretty good right about there. And then we come to animation options, and that's the bulk of the next step here is how you want to animate it. By default, if we hit the / key, we've got this preview animation that's useful for previewing textures, but probably not the way you want to animate text for real in your project, although it's kind of cool. But let's stop playback here. We have a bunch of different options in this pop-up menu. I'm not going to walk through them because you can do that, but I'm going to jump down to one called Tumble Zoom Down and try that one out. And a cool thing, actually, what I will do is show you, you can play, since I have looping enabled and I've selected the title and press the / key, I can go ahead and just select different animation options and play back and watch them happen as I play in real time. This is a great thing about the performance, that I haven't rendered anything and I'm just playing back and trying these different options out. And I'll go back to Tumble Zoom Down and Tumble Zoom Up. Now you'll notice with Tumble Zoom Up, let me stop playback, it starts out, you can see the text already, and that doesn't look good. So we've got a fade in duration that we can increase, and I'll press the / key, and that text then fades on. I'll increase it a little bit more, and then goes away. Beautiful. So once you've chosen an animation style, you can adjust it. There's a built-in checkbox. If you don't want it to animate on at all, you can turn that off. Let's say I don't want it to animate off at all, so I'll turn off the build out, and now the text will animate on the screen, and it'll just stay there. And frequently that's what I want to do. I've got options for how it animates on, and again, I'll let you play with these, but a lot of these are really useful. I especially like accelerate, decelerate, depending on what animation you're after. But try these out. They're great. And then the direction of the animation will change which letter gets animated on first. And frequently random works really well. I'll show you 4 just as another example. It's a little hard to tell because we've got random rotation going on as well here. So it's a little difficult to tell. If we used a different type of animation, for instance, let's do swivel zoom down. We get a better sense of how that works. So I'm going to go back to Tumble Zoom Up, and I'll keep it set to random. We can change how fast this animates on with the retime slider. What may not be obvious is what the numbers are kind of meaningless here, but if you drag the retime slider way down to the left, we get a slower animation, and that's about as slow as you can get. And as you drag to the right, it's quite a bit faster. So let's go with a faster one. Then the build-out parameters are the same. The speed, the direction, the fade, the retime, same idea there. Then we have a set of parameters that are great for keyframing. So I'll come to those in a minute. Blurring the background, I mentioned earlier, it's blurred by default, but you can choose how blurry the background gets, including no blur at all, or blurring it quite a bit. And with most sliders in Final Cut Pro 10, you can go higher by dragging on the value field. So even though the slider only goes to 64, if you want more blur, just drag on the value field or enter a number, and you can get much blurrier there. If you don't want to use the video underneath, or you don't want it to be on black if your clip's on the primary storyline, you can check the display gradient checkbox, and then you can pop open this gradient and edit this gradient to modify the colors and everything else. And I'm not going to go into detail about how to edit gradients in Final Cut because we've covered that elsewhere, but if you know how to edit the gradients, you can, I'm going to undo that. You can make a custom background color for your text animation. So with that being said, I want to turn to the idea of using some keyframes here. And the idea is by publishing the position and rotation of this text, we can add more animation. Right now this text animates on and just kind of hangs out there. And I'd like it to keep moving a little bit. So what I'm going to do, and I'll do this a couple different ways, as I'll bring the playhead to the point where I'd like to start moving. I'm going to set keyframes for position and rotation just by clicking right here. Then I'll move forward in time. I'll open up position and rotation. And then I think I'm going to focus on rotation here. I'm going to rotate in Y to have the text turn. And I think that's probably all. I could turn it a little bit like this as well. And then we'll play that back and see what that looks like. I'll hit the / key. So it comes in and it turns. Now, a couple comments about this. and about some limitations with the Final Cut. First of all, if you're going to keyframe position or rotation, you need to do it in the inspector. It will work for rotation in the viewer if you make a change here in the viewer to rotation, it'll set a keyframe, but it won't work for position. Changing position in the viewer will not set a new keyframe. So in some ways that's an advantage because I could choose to reframe this title and that will not set a new keyframe. That will just move the whole animation over. However, if I were to change the rotation, if I didn't like the rotation and I were to change it now, that's actually going to set a new keyframe. You see how that rotation changed partway through there? I'm going to undo that. So that's comment number one, is you want to make your changes in the inspector rather than the viewer. The second thing is how keyframes are interpolated. And what that means is rotation keyframes by default are linear, so it's a little bit chunky. It comes to kind of a sudden stop you probably saw there. Position keyframes, on the other hand, can be changed. So I'm going to add some position keyframes to show how that works. We have a position keyframe at the beginning. I'm going to go to that second keyframe and change position in Z to move it back a little bit. And here's why I'm doing that. What I'm going to do is show the animation by pressing Control V. So we see our keyframes here. And then I'm going to choose to show two things I'm going to do here. First of all, you can change the position of both these keyframes together by sliding it. I'll come to that in just a minute. But I want to show you how you can change the interpolation here. I'm going to go to selecting just position. And now we only see the position keyframes. If I right click, you can see you can choose linear or smooth, and they're smooth by default. But you can change them to linear, which sometimes is useful to do. If I choose rotation, on the other hand, rotation does not give you an option to smooth it. So what I recommend is this. I'm going to go back to showing all, and I like to take my keyframes and move them to the beginning and end of the animation so that we never see a hard stop, but we just get a nice continuous animation the entire time. Move that over there. And now if we play that through, we have an ongoing animation. It animates on the screen and it slowly keeps moving the whole time. And in this case, I might want to turn on that build out just so as we see the final build out animation. I'll hit the / key, comes in, spins as it drops, and then flies out. Okay, so those are a few tips to deal with creating additional animation on top of using one of the presets and modifying the presets with all the settings up here. One additional thing I should mention is camera position and camera rotation here. This is pretty cool. So even though we've keyframed the text now, we can still reframe the scene with camera position and rotation. So I can pop open, for instance, camera rotation and say, I'd actually like to rotate the text a little differently than this. And I'm not setting any keyframes here. I'm just reframing my scene. And I can go to camera position and play with it a little more. So this gives you a really great deal of flexibility to reframe the scene. And of course, you can keyframe these parameters as well for additional animation on top. But usually I like to use it for some tweaking of my framing. So those are the basic parameters available to you here for using Ripple 3D title styles. The next sections will deal with some very helpful tints, so please stay tuned to check those out. So I want to show you how you can keyframe the environmental rotation parameter to create a great passing light effect. I'm going to choose this metal iron style, press E, place the playhead over it, I'm also going to change the lighting style to backlit. Now, if I go down to the environment rotation parameters and open them up, we have X, Y, and Z. And if you drag on them, you can see that the light moves across the text. And we can animate this. I'll undo X, try out Y, I'll undo that, and I'll try out Z. Kind of like Y. So what I'll do is I'll move the playhead to the beginning. I'm also going to turn off the build-in and build-outs. for this particular animation. And I'm just leaving the text large so you can see what I'm doing, but you could of course make it small and change the text. I'll move close to the beginning. I'll move all the way to the beginning. And for environment rotation Y, I'm going to set a keyframe. Then I'll move toward the end. I'll press the down arrow and the back arrow to be parked on the last frame. And then I'll adjust the Y parameter. And then I'll play back. And then I'll play that back by pressing the / key. You can see how that creates a great passing light effect across the text. You may notice that this environmental rotation parameter is available in the text inspector for any 3D text. However, it is not keyframeable here. That's why we've included it here in the title inspector for 3D title styles. Now I want to show you a couple ways you can use the position and rotation parameters to add keyframes to create additional animation on your title. Here I have a 3D title style, and I've selected a preset animation. I haven't done anything with keyframes. The title drops in and drops out at the end. And if we look in the title inspector, that's based on this tumble and drop animation style. But let's say once it comes in and settles, I'd like it to move some more. What I can do is use these position and rotation parameters. I'll set keyframes for both. I'll open both of them up, then move forward in time, and then I can make changes. Now I need to make changes in the inspector. Although you can manipulate 3D text in the viewer, doing so here will not set keyframes. This action must be accomplished in the title inspector. So here I'll go ahead and make some changes. And then if I play that back, we have a simple additional animation. To adjust the animation, you can select the title and choose Clip, Show Video Animation, or press Ctrl V. And then you can adjust the location of your keyframes. And one other thing you can do that's very useful, if you select position keyframes and right-click them, you can choose whether they're linear or smooth. Unfortunately, you can't do this with rotation keyframes, but only with position keyframes, which is a limitation of Final Cut Pro. So I mentioned that you don't want to make changes to position or rotation in the viewer in order to set new keyframes because it won't work. And that's partially true. If you make changes directly in the viewer after you set keyframes for position and rotation in the inspector, any changes to position will not set new keyframes, but changes to rotation will set keyframes. So generally, I recommend using the inspector. However, what's nice about this is you can reframe your title by changing position. So we have an animation here with the title coming into position, turning, and dropping out. And if I don't like this position, I'm free to modify just position on X, Y, or Z without setting additional keyframes. For instance, if I draw this all the way over, now this whole animation happens over on the right side of the screen. There's no additional keyframe causing it to suddenly shoot over to the right. I'll undo that. However, if I make a rotation change, for instance, I'll rotate the text now, it won't stay rotated like this. If I play back now, it'll start out as it was before, and then a keyframe will kick in. We saw right there. So it did set keyframes for rotation. So in general, my recommendation is to work in the inspector, and then if you want to make changes, overall universal changes to position rotation, rather than trying to remember that stuff, just scroll down and either use the anchor point to change the position of the text, or I like to use the camera position and rotation parameters because I haven't keyframed them. So it's very easy for me to create a different framing of that title. Let's say like this and like that. And now that framing, if I press the / key, will be maintained for the entire animation. Okay, now here's a tip I think you'll find really useful. You may notice when you choose an animation style, for instance, I have tumble and drop selected here, that animation style is for both the incoming animation and the outgoing animation. So the text drops in and drops out again. But what if you want two different types of animations? Like you'd like it to drop in like it does, but then you'd like it perhaps zoom up afterwards. If I chose tumble zoom up now, it will zoom up both to come in and to come out. So here's what you can do. Let's go back to tumble and drop. And what I'm going to do is have it tumble and drop, and I'm going to copy this text, Command C, go to the end, Command V. Now I have two copies. For the first copy, I'm going to turn off the build out. For the second copy, I'm going to turn off the build in. And I'll set the second copy, instead of tumble and drop, to tumble zoom up. So now the text will drop in, stays there a long time, and then it zooms out. So we have two totally different animations for coming in and coming out. And then it's just a matter of shortening these. So I'll move the playhead to a little after that animation. I'll press Option right bracket to trim the tail of that clip. And then I'll move to where this other animation starts and back up and press Option left bracket to trim that one. And if I play them both now, the text drops in, stays, and zooms out. If you want to adjust the timing of your title animation beyond what you're able to do in the inspector with the retime sliders, a great way to handle that is simply to make a compound clip. This works with individual titles, or here I have the same title where I've got two separate titles combined together. And we may notice the first several frames there's black, like 5, 6, 7, 8. There's quite a few frames before the clip starts coming in. What if we really wanted to start it right here? There's no way to do that, because if I trim this clip, all that does is make the animation start a little bit later. But I basically want to trim off those black frames. So I'm going to select both these titles. I'll press Option G to create a compound clip, and I'll call it just title example. And the great thing about a compound clip is I can now freely trim this. So I'll trim it so it starts where some of the letters are already falling in. Option left bracket to trim. And now it starts right on that frame. And then I can have it, let's say I want it to go out right there, Option right bracket. The other thing I can do is press Command R to retime the entire thing any way that I want by choosing one of the speed options or by dragging on the edge of the clip to retime it. I'll undo that. And then we also have the option to blade speed to set up different speed segments. So we could have the clips come in, choose to blade speed, go to where they come out, choose to blade speed again, and then make this middle section shorter, or of course we could trim it as well. So by creating a compound clip, you have more retiming and trimming options. Finally, once you've found a style that you like and you've modified it by choosing a different font and different extrusion, different lighting, etc., you might want to save all those changes as a style so that you can use it at other times. Of course, these are always available for you in the titles browser, but they may not be customized with all of your changes. So to do that, once you've created a style that you like, you can go to the text inspector, click the pop-up menu up top, and choose whether you want to save format attributes, which include the font itself, the appearance attributes, or all. And I usually choose all. So let's choose that, and I'll just call this Ghost Town. That style is now available from the Styles pop-up menu whenever I want to use it. So for example, even though these 3D styles include many animation options, sometimes you want something a little different. If you look at Ripple 3D Animations, which is a free set of additional animation templates for Final Cut Pro 10, there are a variety of very interesting options in here. I'll take the one called Super Tumble. I'll press E, and we'll play what that looks like. So that's the default. There are many other options within Super Tumble. If we look in the title inspector, for the type of animation, I'll choose Drop and Rise. And then there's many more in here that you can watch the tutorial for that. But my point here is, if I like this animation, then I can simply go to the text inspector and apply my saved Ripple 3D text style along with the changes I've made to the font and other attributes to bring it right in here. So I'll make that a little smaller. And now I have my Ripple 3D style that I've customized to make it just the way I want, working with one of the Ripple 3D animations. Again, this was Mark Spencer from Ripple Training. Thanks for watching this tutorial. If you really want to learn more about how to use Final Cut's 3D titles and other features, please check out our tutorials at rippletraining.com. And if you're interested in how to make a lot of this stuff that you see here yourself, you really might want to check out Motion, because Motion lets you do amazing stuff with 3D text and a lot of other things as well. And we have a lot of tutorials on Motion as well at rippletraining.com. So please check us out there, and thanks for watching.